I stood in the shadows of the service corridor and watched my husband press the bride against the wall. Her $50,000 veil dragged on the dirty floor as his hands roamed over her white lace. They thought they were hidden, safe in their betrayal just minutes after she said "I do" to another man. I did not scream. I simply watched my sister and my husband murder my soul while the reception music played on. My name is Emily Hart. I am 29 years old, and as a senior PR specialist at Arden and Vale Communications, my entire career has been built on controlling narratives and spinning disasters into triumphs. I fix things. That is what I do. But as I stood in the dim service hallway of the Plaza Hotel, I realized that some disasters are too catastrophic to spin. Tonight was supposed to be the crowning achievement of the Hart family. My sister, Madeline, the beloved elementary school teacher and the undisputed golden child of our lineage, had just married Thomas Hale. The reception was a blur of expensive crystal, white roses, and the kind of aggressive joy that costs $200 a plate. My parents were glowing, radiating the kind of pride they reserved exclusively for Madeline. I was there, of course, smoothing out the tulle on her dress and ensuring the guests had champagne, playing my role as the supportive, less spectacular sister perfectly. My husband, Ryan Coleman, was somewhere in the crowd, or so I thought. Ryan was the other golden element in my life, a brilliant software engineer who had charmed my parents effortlessly. He was the one thing I had that Madeline did not, or at least that was the lie I told myself to sleep at night. "Emily, you look exhausted," my aunt had told me 10 minutes earlier, patting my cheek with pity. "Go freshen up." I took her advice and headed toward the restrooms, the noise of the live band fading as I moved away from the ballroom. That was when I saw him, Ryan. He was not heading toward the men's room or the bar. He was slipping quietly through a door marked "Staff Only" near the back of the venue. I frowned, hitching up my silk gown. I assumed he was taking a work call or perhaps helping with a vendor issue, as he often tried to be helpful to a fault. I walked faster, my heels clicking softly on the marble before hitting the industrial carpet of the service corridor. "Ryan," I whispered, intending to ask him to come back for the cake cutting. I reached for the handle of the dressing room door, which was slightly ajar, but my hand froze in midair. A voice drifted out. It was a voice I knew better than my own. "Ryan, stop. We can't do this here," Madeline whispered, her voice thick with a mix of panic and pleasure. "I don't care," Ryan growled, a sound so guttural and unlike the gentle man I married that my blood ran cold. I can't stand seeing him touch you. You're mine. Maddie, you've always been mine." I pushed the door open just an inch further. The sight that greeted me shattered my reality instantly. Ryan had my sister pressed up against the vanity mirror. His hands were not fighting her off. They were tangled desperately in her hair, pulling her face to his. The woman who had pledged her life to Thomas Hale less than 2 hours ago was now wrapping her legs around my husband, kissing him with a hunger that made my stomach turn over. I know, Madeline moaned between kisses, her hands gripping the lapels of Ryan's tuxedo jacket. Just be patient. Tonight is for the cameras. Tomorrow is for us." I could not breathe. My lungs seized up as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the corridor. I watched as Ryan buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent like a starving man. The pristine, expensive bridal veil that my mother had cried over that morning slipped from Madeline's hair. It drifted down in slow motion, landing in a heap on the dirty linoleum floor next to Ryan's dress shoes. That white pool of lace on the dirty floor was the final punctuation mark, the perfect sister, the loving husband, the happy family. It all crashed down in that singular silent moment. I stood paralyzed in the shadows, a witness to the murder of my own life, while the band in the other room began to play a love song. I did not scream. I did not kick the door down. I did not drag my sister out by her perfectly styled hair to expose her shame to the 200 guests drinking champagne in her honor. Instead, a terrifying glacial calm washed over me. It was the kind of cold that burns worse than fire. I stepped back from the door, my heels making no sound on the carpet, and retreated into the shadows of the service corridor like a ghost haunting my own life. My mind, trained by years of managing public relations crises, immediately detached from my heart. I looked at the closed door not as a wife or a sister, but as a crime scene investigator observing a disaster that needed to be managed. The betrayal was absolute. It was a double strike, a precise assassination of my reality. Ryan was my husband, the man who held me when I cried, the man who promised me forever. And Madeline, she was my blood. She was the one person in the world who was supposed to have my back when the rest of the world turned away. You are such a fool, Emily, I whispered to myself, my voice trembling just enough to betray the earthquake happening inside my chest. I leaned against the cold concrete wall and closed my eyes, the image of Madeline's face, twisted in ecstasy with my husband, burned behind my eyelids. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Madeline Hart, the golden child, the perfect daughter, the saintly teacher who volunteered at soup kitchens and remembered everyone's birthday. Our parents had spent my entire life building a shrine to her perfection. "Why can't you be more like Madeline?" my mother used to say when I got a B on a report card. "Madeline never causes trouble. Madeline is special." I realized then that they were right. Madeline was special. She was a special kind of monster. I wondered how long they had been laughing at me. Was it months? Years when Ryan told me he had to work late on Tuesdays. Was he with her when Madeline called me to complain about wedding stress? Was she texting him under the table? The blindness I had lived in was humiliating. I had been the supportive little sister, the doting wife, while they turned me into the punchline of their dirty little joke. A server walked past me, carrying a tray of empty glasses. He paused, looking at me with concern. "Miss R, are you all right?" he asked. I straightened my spine. The sobbing mess of a woman inside me was shoved into a mental box and locked away. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. "I am fine," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. Just catching my breath. It is a long night." I could have ended it right there. I could have walked back into that room, grabbed the microphone, and burned the Hart family legacy to the ground. But as I stared at the exit sign, I realized that was exactly what a hysterical, jealous sister would do. They would spin it. They would say I was crazy. They would say I was jealous of Madeline's big day. No, that was too easy for them. A plan began to form in the dark corners of my mind. It was a cold, jagged thing, but it felt solid. If I destroyed them now, it would be a scandal. If I destroyed them later, when they thought they were safe, it would be a tragedy. I wanted the tragedy. I wanted to watch the life drain out of their reputations the way the color had drained from my face. I checked my reflection in the glass of a fire extinguisher case. My lipstick was perfect. My mascara was untouched. I looked exactly like the supportive sister I was supposed to be. I practiced a smile. It did not reach my eyes, but it showed enough teeth to pass for happiness. "Time to go back to the party," I whispered. I walked back into the ballroom. The heat and the noise hit me, but I felt nothing. I navigated through the tables, nodding at relatives I barely knew, until I found my seat. Moments later, the doors opened, and the happy couple re-entered. Ryan had slipped back in through a side door and was now sitting casually at our table, loosening his tie. Madeline was on the stage, clutching Thomas's hand. She looked radiant to everyone else. But as I watched her raise her glass for a toast, I saw it. Her eyes were empty. There was a vacancy there I had never noticed before, a hollowness where a soul should be. She looked at the crowd, her gaze skimming over me without pausing. I just want to say, I am the luckiest woman in the world, Madeline said into the microphone. You have no idea, I muttered under my breath, lifting my champagne glass in a silent, poisonous toast. But you will. The reception hall had transformed into a theater of the grotesque, at least to my eyes. From my seat at the edge of the bridal table, I watched the performance with a new, surgical precision. Before my trip to the service corridor, I would have seen a loving sister and a devoted husband sharing a laugh over a glass of champagne. Now, I saw the code. Ryan stood behind Madeline's chair, his hand resting casually on the backrest. To the untrained eye, it was innocent, but I watched his thumb. It was stroking the velvet fabric, just inches from her bare shoulder, in a slow, rhythmic motion that made my skin crawl. Every time Madeline threw her head back to laugh at a guest's joke, her eyes darted to Ryan. It was a microsecond of connection, a shared, secret electric current running between them that excluded everyone else in the room. They were high on the thrill of their deception, drunk on the fact that they were getting away with it in a room full of people who loved them. Then there was Thomas Hale. My new brother-in-law stood a few feet away, loosening his tie and laughing with one of my cousins. Thomas was 32, a self-made logistics entrepreneur who wore his success lightly. He had an open, honest face, the kind that flushed pink when he had too much wine. He looked at Madeline with a reverence that was painful to witness. He thought he had won the lottery. He had no idea he had actually purchased a ticket to his own destruction. I gripped the stem of my wine glass so hard I feared it might snap. Thomas was the only person in this room who stood to lose as much as I did. In fact, he might lose more. I had lost a husband I thought I knew. But Thomas, he was binding his life, his finances, and his future to a lie before the ink on the marriage license was even dry. I have to tell him, I whispered to the empty air. The thought terrified me. If I walked up to Thomas right now and told him his new wife had just been intimate with my husband in a hallway, would he believe me? Or would I look like the jealous, unhinged younger sister trying to ruin the Golden Girl's big moment? I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, and navigated through the crowd. Thomas was alone for a brief second near the ice sculpture, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. Thomas, I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. He turned, his smile genuine and warm. Emily, there you are. I was looking for you. This party is… well, it is a lot, isn't it? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Thomas, I need to speak with you, alone. It is about Madeline. His smile faltered slightly, replaced by a look of mild concern. Is she okay? Is she… having a panic attack? I know she was worried about the first dance. No, it is not that, I said, glancing around to ensure Ryan was not nearby. It is… something I saw? You need to know before… Hey, there is the groom. A boisterous voice boomed. My Uncle Jerry clapped a heavy hand on Thomas's shoulder, interrupting me. Come on, son. The photographer wants a shot of the men by the bar. Thomas looked at me apologetically. Hold that thought, Emily. I really want to hear what you have to say. Give me 5 minutes. He was pulled away into the throng of black tuxedos and loud laughter. I stood there, the words dying in my throat. I felt a sudden chill, a physical drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I turned my head. Madeline was standing 10 feet away. She was not smiling. The mask of the blushing bride had slipped completely. She was staring directly at me, her eyes narrowed into slits of icy suspicion. She held her bouquet of white roses like a weapon. In that moment, the sister I had worshipped, the sister who braided my hair and helped me with my homework, was dead. In her place stood a stranger who knew exactly what she was doing. She walked over to me, gliding smoothly across the floor. She leaned in close, pretending to adjust the strap of my dress. You look tense, she whispered, her voice low and hard. "You should relax. You would not want to ruin everyone's night with one of your moods, would you?" Her fingers lingered on my shoulder, a grip that was too tight to be affectionate. It was a warning. She did not know exactly what I had seen, but she knew I was a threat. She was daring me to make a scene. She was banking on the fact that Emily Hart always followed the rules, always kept the peace, and never overshadowed Madeline. "I am fine." "Maddie," I lied, meeting her gaze with a newfound steeliness. "I am just taking it all in." "Good," she said, stepping back and flashing a bright, fake smile for a passing guest. "Because we are a happy family. Emily, remember that." She turned and walked back toward Ryan, swaying her hips intentionally. I watched her go, and the fear in my chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I would not scream. I would not make a scene. Not tonight. Tonight, I would let them think they had won. I would let them think I was the same passive, adoring Emily they had always known. But the war had started, and as I watched Thomas laugh across the room, oblivious to the knife in his back, I knew he was not just a victim. He was my weapon. I just had to figure out how to fire him. The speeches provided the perfect cover. While my father stood at the microphone, recounting a sanitized version of Madeline's childhood virtues to a captive audience, I slipped away from the table. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my movements were fluid and practiced. I was not fleeing this time. I was hunting. I pushed open the door to the dressing room. The air inside was stifling, thick with the scent of Madeline's expensive floral perfume mixed with the faint, muskier smell of my husband's cologne. It was a sensory assault that made my stomach lurch, but I forced myself to step inside and lock the door behind me. The room was exactly as they had left it. The chaos of their lust was scattered across the small space. My eyes immediately fell to the floor where the expensive lace veil lay crumpled in a heap of dust and lint. It looked like a discarded shroud. Next to it, catching the dim light, was a small gold object. I knelt down and picked it up. It was a cufflink. I turned it over in my palm, feeling the cold metal bite into my skin. I knew this cufflink. I had bought this pair for Ryan for our 3rd anniversary. You left your signature." "Ryan," I whispered to the empty room, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and adrenaline. A soft vibration buzzed from the vanity table. I turned and saw Madeline's phone sitting next to a pile of makeup sponges. She had been so consumed by her desire to betray me that she had forgotten the one device that contained her entire life. The screen lit up with a notification. "Ryan, we have to be more careful. Emily is acting strange." My breath hitched. I stared at the screen, the white letters burning into my retinas. They were not just cheating. They were strategizing. I reached for the phone. I knew my sister. She was creatures of habit, and her passcode had been the same since high school, the last 4 digits of our home landline. I typed it in. The phone unlocked. I did not hesitate. I opened their message history and scrolled up. My finger swiped back through days, then weeks, then months. The horror unfolded in chronological order. There were messages from 3 months ago, long before Madeline had walked down the aisle today. "Madeline, he is so boring. Ryan, I need you. Can you come over after he falls asleep? Ryan, I told Emily I have a late deployment. I will be there by 10. I felt bile rise in my throat. I kept scrolling. It got worse. There were exchanges about money. I saw a transfer confirmation where Ryan had sent her $2,000. "Madeline, I need this for the venue deposit. Do not tell M. I will pay you back once Thomas gives me access to the joint account." You stole from us to pay for this wedding," I hissed, my hand trembling so violently I almost dropped the phone. "You made us pay for this charade." I pulled out my own phone and began photographing everything. Click, scroll, click. I captured the timestamps. The explicit photos they had sent each other, the jokes about how oblivious Thomas and I were. I was building a dossier of my own destruction. My eyes darted to the small trash can in the corner. Something white was uncrumpled near the top. I reached in and pulled out a receipt. It was from the Grandview Hotel, a boutique place 3 blocks from my office. The date was from last Tuesday. The time was 7 in the evening. I froze. Last Tuesday, Ryan had told me he was pulling an all-nighter to fix a server crash. He had even sent me a picture of his desk. I realized now the picture was old. He had been in a hotel bed with my sister while I sat at home reheating lasagna and worrying about his stress levels. This was not a mistake. It was not a moment of weakness induced by wedding champagne. This was a calculated, long-term campaign of deception. They had not just fallen into bed together. They had built a parallel life right under our noses, funding it with my money and Thomas's trust. I shoved the receipt into my bra, hiding it against my skin. I took one last photo of the veil on the floor and the cufflink in my hand. Then I placed Madeline's phone back exactly where it had been. I looked at myself in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back was pale, but her eyes were dry. The tears were gone. "Okay," I whispered, the word sounding like the click of a loaded gun. "If you want to play games, let's play." I unlocked the door and stepped back out into the hallway. I had walked into that room as a victim, but I was leaving as an executioner. I had the evidence. Now, I just needed the perfect moment to drop the guillotine. I slid back into my chair at the head table, smoothing the napkin over my lap with deliberate, terrifying precision. The knowledge I carried in my chest felt heavy, like a stone, but I did not let it drag me down. Instead, I let it sharpen me. I looked across the centerpiece of white hydrangeas at my husband and my sister. They were whispering again, their heads bent close together. "You two just cannot get enough of each other. Can you?" I said, my voice ringing out a little too loudly over the clinking silverware. Ryan jumped as if he had been electrocuted. His knee hit the underside of the table, rattling the glasses. Madeline froze, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. "Oh, Emily," Madeline said, her laugh brittle and high-pitched. "We were just discussing the honeymoon logistics." "Of course," I beamed, flashing a smile that showed all my teeth. "You deserve it, Maddie. You have always worked so hard for what you want, and you usually get it. Do you not, regardless of the cost?" The table went quiet for a heartbeat. My mother, seated 2 chairs down, smiled obliviously. "That is true. Madeline has always been so driven." I picked up my wine glass and swirled the dark red liquid. I turned my gaze to Thomas, who was buttering a roll, completely unaware that his life was currently burning down around him. "Thomas," I said, leaning forward, "you are a brave man, taking on the heart women. We can be intense." Thomas laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made my heart ache for him. "I think I can handle it, Emily. Besides, I feel like I won the jackpot." "You certainly won something," I said. "Thomas, I actually wanted to ask you about—" "Thomas, honey," Madeline cut in sharply, her hand shooting out to cover his on the table. "Did you try the risotto? It is divine. You must try it right now." She shoved a forkful of food toward him, effectively silencing our conversation. Her eyes locked onto mine, hard and warning. She knew I was up to something, but she could not figure out what. The uncertainty was eating her alive. I took a slow sip of wine. "You know, watching you two reminds me of when we were kids," I announced, addressing the whole table. "Madeline was always so good at sharing. Well, actually, that is not quite right. She was good at borrowing." Ryan coughed violently into his napkin. He looked pale, his forehead glistening with a sheen of sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "Emily," Ryan muttered, avoiding my eyes. Maybe let's not tell old stories right now." "Oh, but It is a funny one. Ryan, I insisted, my voice sweet as poison. I had this beautiful locket that Grandma gave me. I loved it. But Madeline wanted it. She did not ask for it. She just took it. She wore it to school every day for a week while I tore my room apart looking for it. And when I finally saw it on her neck, do you know what she said? I paused for effect, locking eyes with my sister. She had gone deathly pale. She said she was just keeping it safe for me. I finished softly. Because she thought she wore it better. Thomas frowned, sensing the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. That is a bit odd. It is just a silly story, Madeline snapped, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Emily loves to exaggerate. I never exaggerate, I said coldly. I just pay attention to the details. Ryan reached for his water glass, his hand shaking so badly that water sloshed over the rim onto the white tablecloth. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, terrified that I was about to stand up and scream the truth. But I didn't. I just smiled at him, a calm, serene smile that promised retribution. The fear in his eyes was delicious. It gave me a rush of power I had never felt before. They were scared of me. The quiet, supportive Emily was suddenly the most dangerous person in the room. I looked over at Thomas again. He was not eating. He was looking back and forth between Madeline and me, his brow furrowed. He was putting the pieces together, the tension, the weird comments, Ryan's sweating. He didn't have the full picture yet, but he knew something was wrong. His eyes met mine. In that brief exchange, I saw confusion, but I also saw a question. He was asking me for the truth. I realized then that I could not do this alone. If I exposed them now, they would gaslight me. They would spin the narrative. But Thomas was the money. Thomas was the status. Thomas was the prize Madeline had cheated to win. If I turned him, I would not just win the battle, I would win the war. I held his gaze for a second longer than was polite, trying to telecommunicate a single message. Wait for me. Then I turned back to my meal, cutting into my steak with deliberate, forceful strokes. This dinner is delicious, I said. I really hope everyone is enjoying it, because tomorrow everything changes. The drive home was the longest 30 minutes of my life. I left the reception alone, claiming a sudden migraine, while my husband stayed behind. Ryan had looked almost relieved when I said I was leaving. He told me he needed to stay to help my parents and Madeline load the gifts into the cars. It was a lie, of course. I knew exactly whose gift he wanted to unwrap, and it certainly was not a toaster. I walked into our silent, dark house. It smelled like lemon floor cleaner and the pot roast I had made 2 days ago. It smelled like a home. But as I locked the door behind me, I knew it was just a building where 2 strangers lived. I did not go to bed. I did not take off my makeup. I went straight to Ryan's home office and woke up his desktop computer. He was arrogant. He was so arrogant that he had never changed his password from the date of our wedding. I typed in the numbers, and the screen blinked to life. My hands flew across the keyboard. I was not a weeping wife anymore. I was a crisis manager conducting a forensic audit. I linked his cloud account to the desktop and watched the data pour in. I accessed his GPS history first. I saw the red dots on the map. There were dozens of visits to the Grandview Hotel. There were stops at a coffee shop near Madeline's apartment at 2 a.m. I took screenshots of everything. Next, I uploaded the photos I had taken in the dressing room, the crumpled veil, the cufflink, the text messages on Madeline's screen. I arranged them chronologically, creating a timeline of betrayal that stretched back 6 months. I found credit card statements he had thought were hidden in a subfolder. There were charges for jewelry I never received and dinners I never ate. I created a new folder on my encrypted external hard drive. I named it simply Truth. I opened the folder and reviewed the files. It was a masterclass in deception. I saw a text from Ryan to Madeline from 3 weeks ago. Ryan. She suspects nothing. She is too busy with her career. I stared at the screen. A strange, cold sensation filled my chest. I waited for the tears to come, but my eyes remained dry. The pain was there, buried deep, but it had been cauterized by a rage so pure it felt like ice. I was calm. I was terrifyingly calm. I realized then that I was not just going to divorce Ryan. I was going to dismantle him. I needed Thomas. He was the wild card. If he stayed with Madeline, my revenge would be messy. If he turned on her, it would be fatal. I opened a secure browser and created a burner email address. I typed Thomas's personal email into the recipient line. I kept the message short. I knew Thomas. He was a logical man. He would not respond to hysteria, but he would respond to data. Subject concerning Madeline message. I have information regarding your wife and her activities over the past 6 months. You need to see this before you sign the marriage certificate. Do not ignore this. I hit send. I sat back in the leather chair, the silence of the room pressing against my ears. I wondered if he was asleep next to her. I wondered if he was staring at the ceiling, wondering why his new sister-in-law had looked at him with such pity during dinner. 3 minutes later, a notification pinged. Thomas, who is this? I typed back immediately. Me, someone who saw what happened in the dressing room tonight. Check your wife's phone if you do not believe me. There was a long pause. 5 minutes. Then 10. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had he woken her up? Had she talked her way out of it? Then, the reply came. Thomas, meet me. The Coffee Bean on 4th Street. 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Come alone. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. He was hooked. I spent the rest of the night printing. The rhythmic whirring of the printer was the only sound in the house. I printed the texts. I printed the photos. I printed the maps. I organized them into a sleek black binder, the kind I used for client presentations. I decided exactly how I would present it. I would not start with the sex. That was too emotional. I would start with the money. Thomas was a businessman. Theft would offend him just as much as infidelity. By the time the sun began to bleed gray light through the blinds, I was ready. I showered, scrubbing the hairspray and the scent of the wedding off my skin. I dressed in a sharp navy blazer and trousers. I did not look like a woman who had been cheated on. I looked like a woman who was about to close a business deal. I grabbed the black binder and walked to the door. You really thought I was stupid. Ryan, I whispered to the empty hallway. Big mistake. I stepped out into the cool morning air, the heavy binder tucked under my arm. The end game had begun. The coffee shop was quiet at 7 in the morning, filled only with the low hum of the espresso machine and the rustle of newspapers. I sat in the back corner, my hands clasped tightly around a cup of black coffee that I had not tasted. The black binder sat on the table between us like a loaded weapon. Thomas walked in 2 minutes late. He looked tired, his eyes puffy from what I assumed was a wedding night spent celebrating. When he saw me, he forced a polite, confused smile. He wore a casual polo shirt that made him look younger and more vulnerable than he had in his tuxedo. Emily, he said, pulling out the chair opposite me. You were very mysterious in your emails. Is everything okay? Is Madeline safe? I did not smile back. I simply placed my hand on the binder and slid it across the wooden table until it rested under his hands. Open it, I said, my voice flat and devoid of any warmth. Thomas hesitated. He looked at the binder, then at me, his brow furrowing. He opened the cover. I watched the blood drain from his face in real time. It started at his cheeks and washed down to his neck until he looked like a wax figure. He stared at the first page, the photo of the veil on the dirty floor. Then he turned the page, the screenshot of the text messages. Then the hotel receipt. Then the GPS logs. His hands began to tremble. It was a subtle shake at first, but within seconds, the pages were rattling as he turned them. The silence at our table was heavy, suffocating. He read every word. He looked at every timestamp. He did not look away. "Emily," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking so hard it sounded like glass breaking. Are you sure? This is Ryan and Madeline. They hate each other. They always bicker." "It is a cover," I said, my voice steady. "They fight in public to hide what they do in private. I saw them. Thomas, yesterday, in the service hallway. I saw him kissing her while you were dancing with your mother." Thomas closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out, but he brushed it away angrily. He looked down at the binder again, flipping to the section marked with dates. His finger stopped on a specific text thread from 5 months ago. "January 5th, he muttered. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. She postponed the wedding the first time on January 5th. She told me she was having a mental health crisis. She said the pressure was too much and she needed to go to a spa retreat for a weekend to clear her head." I reached over and flipped the page to Ryan's credit card statement. "Look at the charge on January 5th. Thomas." His eyes scanned the paper. "The Grandview Hotel, room service for 2. Champagne. Ryan told me he was at a tech conference in San Jose that weekend," I said. Thomas let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. And October 12th. The second postponement. She said she wasn't sure if she could be a good wife. She made me beg her to stay with me. I spent that whole night crying on her couch while He looked at the binder. On October 12th, there was a photo from a traffic camera I had pulled from our joint toll account. It showed Ryan's car driving toward the beach with a woman in the passenger seat wearing sunglasses, a woman with Madeline's hair. "She was with him," Thomas whispered, "while I was begging for her love. She was with your husband." I expected him to scream. I expected him to throw the table or storm out. But Thomas did something that frightened me more. He went completely still. The trembling in his hands stopped. He closed the binder gently, aligning the edges with the corner of the table. He took a deep breath, and when he looked up, the warmth was gone from his eyes. The kind, loving man who had married my sister yesterday had vanished. In his place sat a man made of cold stone. "If I divorce her now," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, "she gets half the assets I put into the joint trust last week. She plays the victim. She tells everyone I was abusive or controlling." "She will spin it," I agreed. "She is good at that." "I do not want to just leave her, Emily," Thomas said. He leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw a darkness in him that matched my own. I want to destroy her. I want to take back every single thing she stole from me, my dignity, my money, my trust." "I have a plan," I said, "but I cannot do it alone. I need access to her financial records. I need to know what she is spending and where." Thomas placed his hand on top of mine. His grip was firm, cold, and absolute. "You will have it," he said. "We are going to pretend everything is fine. We are going to let them think they got away with it. And then we are going to bury them." I looked at my brother-in-law. We were 2 people who had been hollowed out by the people we loved most, but in that emptiness, we had found a terrifying new purpose. "Deal," I said. The alliance was formed. The wedding was over. The war had just begun. For the next 3 days, Thomas and I did not just investigate our spouses. We dissected them. We turned my dining room table into a war room, covering the mahogany surface with bank statements, phone logs, and printed emails. The initial shock of betrayal had hardened into a cold, military-grade efficiency. We were no longer victims. We were auditors of a crime against our lives. "Look at this," Thomas said, sliding a highlighted bank statement across the table. His voice was devoid of the warmth I had associated with him at the wedding. "Last month, Madeline spent $4,000 at a men's boutique in the city. I never saw a single item from that store. I picked up the paper. The date was 2 days before Ryan's birthday. Ryan came home with a new cashmere coat that week. I said, my voice flat. He told me he won it in a raffle at work, a raffle for a $4,000 coat. And I believed him. And here, Thomas continued, tapping a spreadsheet on his laptop. Ryan withdrew $500 in cash every Friday for the last 6 months. That is $12,000. Emily, where did it go? Madeline's student loans, I realized, connecting the dots instantly. She told Mom she finally paid them off with a bonus. Teachers do not get bonuses like that. Ryan paid her debt with our savings. The financial infidelity was sickening, but it was the brazenness of their physical affair that truly twisted the knife. I needed confirmation that this wasn't just happening in hotels, but in the spaces I occupied every day. I went to the front desk of my office building the next morning. The security guard, an older man named Jerry, who I always brought coffee to, smiled when he saw me. "Shh, Jerry," I said, leaning over the counter. "I need to ask you something. Has my husband been by lately? He said he dropped off lunch, but I missed him." Jerry nodded enthusiastically. "Oh, absolutely. Mrs. Hart. He is here almost every Tuesday and Thursday. Usually meets that pretty blonde woman, your sister, right in the parking lot. They usually head out for a long lunch." My stomach tightened. They were meeting right under my window while I sat in meetings, oblivious. Did they seem happy? I asked. Jerry's smile faded. He lowered his voice. "Well, actually, last week, I heard them arguing near his sedan. I was on a smoke break. He was yelling something about, 'I cannot leave her yet. The timing is bad.' And she was crying, saying she was tired of waiting." I thanked him and walked away, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. They were planning an exit strategy. They were discussing how to discard us like used tissues. I met Thomas that evening in his car, parked on a quiet street 2 blocks from my house. He held up a USB drive. "I called a favor with a friend who manages security at the Grandview," Thomas said. "It cost me a bottle of very expensive scotch, but I got it." He plugged the drive into his laptop. The grainy black and white footage flickered to life. It was dated 3 weeks ago. The elevator doors opened, and there they were. Ryan was holding Madeline's hand, pulling her down the hallway. He stopped in front of room 304. He kissed her, pushing her up against the doorframe before sliding the key card in. It was intimate. It was practiced. It was undeniable. "They look so comfortable," Thomas whispered, his eyes fixed on the screen. Like they have done this 100 times. "They probably have," I said. "We have enough. Thomas, we have the money trail. We have the texts. We have the witnesses. And now we have the video." Thomas shut the laptop with a snap. "So, when do we do it?" "Sunday," I said. "Mom and Dad are hosting a post-wedding family dinner. Everyone will be there. It is the perfect stage." I pulled a folded piece of stationery from my purse. I had written a draft of what I wanted to say, a script for the destruction of my marriage. I handed it to Thomas. "You need to be ready," I told him. "When we drop this bomb, the shrapnel is going to hit everyone, my parents, your parents, their reputations." Thomas looked at me. The shadows under his eyes were deep, but his gaze was steady. "Emily, I do not care about the collateral damage anymore. I just want to see the look on her face when she realizes the game is over. We will," I promised. "We are going to burn their little fantasy world to the ground. Thomas. And we are going to watch it burn together." I got out of the car and walked back to my house. Ryan was in the living room, watching television. He looked up and smiled. That same charming, lying smile I had fallen in love with. "Hey, honey," he said. "You are home late. Everything okay?" "Everything is perfect, Ryan." I lied, hanging up my coat. "I was just planning a little surprise for the family dinner on Sunday." "Oh, what kind of surprise?" he asked. "You will see," I said, walking past him to the kitchen. "It is going to be unforgettable." Sunday dinner at my parents' house had always been a sacred ritual, a weekly performance of suburban perfection where we pretended to be the ideal American family. The smell of rosemary roasted chicken and furniture polish filled the hallway as I walked in, a scent that used to comfort me but now made my stomach turn. I had called this gathering under the pretense of sharing big news, a phrase that I knew would bait my mother into setting the table with the good china. Madeline was already there, pacing the living room with a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. She looked annoyed, her perfect brow furrowed as she typed furiously on her phone. When she saw me, she didn't offer a hug. She just rolled her eyes. "Emily, seriously? You could have checked with me first," Madeline snapped, gesturing with her wine glass. "I have a million thank you notes to write, and Thomas and I are supposed to be looking at listings in the city tomorrow. This little surprise party is really inconvenient. I promise it will be worth it." "Maddie," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Besides, we have not all been together since the wedding." Ryan appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He was playing the role of the dutiful son-in-law perfectly, helping my mother with the appetizers. He walked over to me and wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me into his side. My skin crawled. It took every ounce of my willpower not to shove him away. "You are being mysterious, babe," Ryan whispered against my ear, his breath smelling of the scotch he had been drinking with my father. Are we finally telling them about trying for a baby?" I looked up at him, forcing a smile that felt like a mask of clay. "It is definitely about the future, Ryan, but not the one you are thinking of." Thomas was the last to arrive. He walked in wearing a dark sweater, his face pale and unsmiling. He did not look at Madeline. He walked straight to the mantel where my parents kept the framed photos of us growing up, Madeline holding trophies. Madeline graduating. Madeline and me. He stared at them for a long moment, his back rigid. My father clapped his hands together, oblivious to the tension that was thick enough to choke on. "All right, everyone, table is set. Let's hear this news of Emily's before the food gets cold." We moved to the dining room. I sat at my usual spot with Ryan on my right. Madeline sat across from me, and Thomas took the seat next to her. The table was beautiful, covered in lace and silver, a perfect stage for the carnage that was about to unfold. Under the table, my hand gripped my phone. I felt the vibration of a message coming in, but I did not look down. I knew who it was. I typed a quick reply without looking, my thumbs moving by memory. Now or never. A second later, my phone buzzed with a response. "I am ready." My mother began to pass the bowl of salad, her face beaming with anticipation. "I bet it is a promotion," she said happily. "Or maybe a new house." I took the bowl and set it down heavily on the table. The clatter of the ceramic against the wood silenced the room. I did not serve myself. Instead, I picked up my phone and placed it face up in the center of the table, right between the roast chicken and the candelabra. "Actually, Mom, I did not invite you here for dinner," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. "I invited you here because there are things happening in this family that can no longer be hidden." Madeline sighed loudly, dropping her fork. "Oh my God, Emily, are we doing this again? Is this another one of your insecurities about me getting married?" "No, Maddie," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "This is not about my insecurity. It is about your reality." I tapped the screen of my phone. A moment later, the large smart television mounted on the wall behind my father flickered to life. I had already paired the device. The screen turned black, mirroring my phone. Ryan froze. His hand, which had been reaching for his water glass, stopped in mid-air. He looked from the phone to the TV, and I saw the first spark of genuine terror in his eyes. He knew, deep down, in the pit of his guilty stomach, he knew. "Emily, what is this?" my father asked, looking confused. "Turn off the TV. We are eating." "We are not eating." "Dad," I stated, standing up slowly. "We are watching." I looked at Thomas. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, his eyes cold and hard as flint. "We need to talk about the truth," I announced, my voice ringing with a power I had never possessed before. And since liars never volunteer the truth, I decided to bring the receipts. A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the room. It was the silence of a held breath, the split second before the lightning strike hits the tree. Madeline looked at the blank screen, then at Ryan, and for the first time in her life, she looked small. I swiped my finger across the screen. The first image appeared on the 50-inch television. It was the photo of Madeline's veil lying on the dirty floor of the service corridor, next to Ryan's distinctive gold cufflink. "What is this?" my mother whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. I did not answer. I swiped again. The text messages appeared, blown up to the size of movie subtitles. Madeline. "He is so boring. Ryan, I need you. Ryan, I will be there by 10. The room erupted. My father dropped his fork, the metal clattering loudly against the china. My mother looked like she had been slapped, her face draining of all color. Ryan let out a strangled noise, half gasp, half sob. "Stop it!" Madeline screamed, jumping out of her chair. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Turn it off. She faked this. Emily is jealous. She has always been jealous of me. These are Photoshop." I did not stop. I played the video. The grainy black and white footage showed Ryan pushing Madeline up against the hotel room door, his hands roaming over her body before they stumbled inside together. There was no denying the way she wrapped her legs around him. There was no Photoshop that could fabricate that level of betrayal. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a family shattering. Then, Thomas stood up. The movement was slow and terrifying. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a platinum credit card. He flicked it onto the table. It spun and landed right in front of Madeline's salad plate. "You bought him a Rolex with that card last week," Thomas said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You told me you were buying a wedding gift for me. I guess I was the one paying for your affair." "Thomas, no, baby, listen to me," Madeline stammered, reaching for him. He stepped back as if she were contagious. "Do not touch me." Ryan suddenly scrambled out of his chair. He fell to his knees on the Persian rug, grabbing the hem of my skirt. He was crying, ugly, heaving sobs that made him look pathetic. "Emily, please." "I am so sorry," he blubbered, snot running down his face. "It meant nothing." She meant nothing. "Please do not do this." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. The love I had held for this man for 5 years had evaporated, leaving only disgust. I stepped back, pulling my skirt from his grasp. "Get up, Ryan," I said coldly. "You are embarrassing yourself, and you are embarrassing me. We can fix this. We can go to counseling," he begged. "There is no we anymore," I said, my voice cutting through his sobbing like a razor. "I will have the divorce papers sent to your office on Monday. Do not come back to the house. I changed the locks this morning." I turned to Thomas. He nodded at me, a silent acknowledgement of our victory. He pulled a thick envelope from his jacket pocket and dropped it on the table next to the credit card. "Those are annulment papers, Madeline," Thomas said. "And my lawyers are already drafting a lawsuit for the return of every cent I spent on you and your debts. Fraud is a serious crime. I suggest you find a good attorney." Madeline looked at the papers, then at Thomas, then at Ryan kneeling on the floor. The reality of her destruction finally hit her. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands and wailing. It was a sound of pure despair, the sound of a golden child realizing she was made of cheap brass. My parents sat frozen, unable to look at either of their daughters. They were broken, but that was no longer my problem to fix. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I did not look back at the chaos I had unleashed. I walked through the hallway, past the family photos that were now just lies in frames, and opened the front door. The night air hit my face, cool and crisp. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that felt cleaner than it had in years. I walked down the driveway to my car, my heels clicking a rhythm of freedom on the pavement. I looked up at the sky. It was vast and full of stars. For the first time in my life, I was not Emily the Shadow. I was Emily the Survivor. And as I unlocked my car, I knew that the best part of my life was just beginning. Shutterstock. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on this family drama. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.